Tim Curry's final words about death are going viral after his passing, and what he said is chilling. Just months before he died, Curry spoke openly about the end of his life and revealed exactly how he wanted it to happen. What makes it even more shocking is how closely his words matched what eventually happened. Let's get into it. Tim Curry died late on a Tuesday night at his home in Los Angeles. Law enforcement sources told TMZ the English actor died late Tuesday night at his home in Los Angeles, and no foul play is suspected. He was 80 years old. Police got the call around 11:23 p.m. Police responded to a home on the 10,500 block of Alameda Street in North Hollywood at around 11 p.m. on Tuesday for a death investigation of a male in his 80s. Dispatch audio later obtained by TMZ showed the Los Angeles Fire Department had already been called out earlier that night for a medical emergency, and the subject was pronounced dead at the scene. His longtime manager, Marcia Hurwitz, confirmed the news to Variety, saying Curry died peacefully at his Toluca Lake home. No cause of death has been made public. What has come out, though, is a lot more personal, and it's what's driving this whole story right now. Just months before he died, Curry sat down for an interview with CBS Sunday Morning. It was October 2025, and he was asked point blank how he felt about the end. His answer has been circulating everywhere since the news broke. He said he didn't fear death, that he tried to avoid it, as I think we all do, but that he suspected in the end he'd welcome it. Then he went further. He said he thought it might be very comforting to go, and that he wanted to earn it. He wanted, in his own words, to earn the privilege of not being here. That's the line people keep coming back to. An actor known for playing monsters and villains, talking about death like it was a reward he had to work for. It gets stranger. In that same conversation, he made clear he wasn't rushing toward it, but he also wasn't fighting it. He said he wasn't galloping towards it, but that he might well embrace it. 10 months later, he was gone. And it's not just the CBS interview. In his 2025 memoir, Vagabond, Curry wrote directly about what death might feel like to him. He admitted he'd been terrified at one point in his life because he didn't know what was happening to his body and had no idea whether pain was coming. But then he wrote something that reads very differently now. He said that if death came for him peacefully and he faded gently from light into dark oblivion, why would he be afraid of it? Sometimes, he said, he rather thought it would be a comfort. Fade gently from light into dark oblivion. Written by a man who, less than a year later, would die quietly in his own home with no foul play, no violence, nothing dramatic. Just a call to 911 and a man who didn't wake up. So that's the hook everyone's talking about. Now let's get into how he got to that place. What actually happened to him, physically, that made an actor famous for chaos start talking so plainly about peace. To understand why Curry's last public words landed the way they did, you have to go back more than a decade, to 2012. That year, he'd experienced a major stroke and underwent brain surgery. From that point on, the actor was wheelchair-bound and unable to walk. The stroke didn't just take his mobility. Doctors operating on him found 2 blood clots in his brain, and Curry's lifelong health problem stemmed from the 2012 stroke, which left him with complete paralysis on his left side. Though he could still talk, that last part mattered to him more than almost anything else. In multiple interviews over the years, he described how frightening it was to temporarily lose that ability. He had to relearn how to speak from scratch, and he called it one of the hardest parts of the whole ordeal, saying it was strange and that he hated not being able to communicate because talking was something he genuinely loved doing. There's a detail here that makes the whole story land differently. Curry's own father died from a stroke back in 1958 when Curry was just 12 years old. So when Curry had his own stroke in 2012, he wasn't approaching it blind. He said he knew a lot of people didn't survive a stroke and that his father had been an exception, so he was scared. That fear, by his own account, faded over the years that followed. What replaced it was the calm, almost accepting tone that defined everything he said publicly from that point forward. For over a decade, Curry mostly stayed out of the spotlight. He kept working in smaller ways, voice roles, occasional appearances, but the flamboyant, larger-than-life performer that audiences knew from the 70s and 80s was, by necessity, living a much quieter life. He needed specialized care around the clock, and he was candid about what that looked like, once joking that the people looking after him took incredibly good care of him and made him laugh. Then came September 2025, a moment that, looking back now, feels like one of his final real goodbyes to the public. It was the 50th anniversary screening of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, the film that made him a legend. Curry showed up, he spoke to the crowd, and he was blunt about where he stood physically. He told the audience he still couldn't walk, which was why he was in what he called this silly chair, and that it was very limiting. It was, by multiple accounts, his last public appearance, with his last on-screen credit coming from the 2024 Project Stream. That night at the anniversary screening lines up almost exactly with the timeline of his final CBS interview and the release of his memoir. In other words, the last year of Tim Curry's public life was one long, unusually open conversation about mortality, not delivered with fear, but with something closer to resignation and even curiosity. He talked about not remembering things the way he used to. He talked about his face having gone sideways after the stroke. He talked about doubting he could ever do theater again. And running underneath all of it was this steady acceptance that whatever was coming, he was ready to meet it. That's the piece that makes his final months so striking. He wasn't hiding from what his body had become. He was narrating it out loud to whoever would listen, right up until the moment it stopped. When the news broke, tributes came in fast, and they came from people who actually knew him, not just fans reacting to a headline. Carol Burnett, who starred alongside Curry in the 1982 film Annie, posted a clip of the two of them together. She said nobody could play lovable villains better than he could, calling him a dear friend, and saying she was blessed to know him. Michael McKean, his Clue co-star, shared something quieter and more personal. He wrote that his last conversation with Tim Curry was about life and love and laughter. No details beyond that, just a simple line that suggested the two of them had already, in some way, said their goodbyes before this ever became public news. Rosie O'Donnell kept hers even shorter, calling him simply a sweetest man in her tribute. Luke Evans, who took over the role of Frank-N-Furter on Broadway decades after Curry originated it, wrote a longer message describing him as a bright, fierce flame with an exquisite charm and rich vocal tone, calling him an inspiration to so many people for the roles he played. Rob Schneider, his Home Alone 2 co-star, posted his reaction on X the same day the news broke, calling it gutted and writing that the sensational character actor Tim Curry had left the stage. Curry's own team put out a statement that, in a way, tied everything together: his career, his personality, and those final reflective months. They described him as widely known for flamboyant, colorful performances, but said his real legacy to the people who actually knew him was his curious, expansive mind and generous, gentle heart, both of which remained open and filled with anticipation until his final breath. Filled with anticipation until his final breath. That phrase, coming directly from the people closest to him, lines up almost perfectly with everything he'd been saying for the past year. It wasn't dread, it was, by every account from people in his life, something closer to readiness. So where does that leave the story everyone's been sharing since the news broke? The idea that his last words were shocking. Here's the thing. He never stood at a hospital bed and delivered some dramatic final line the way it happens in movies. What actually happened is that a man who spent 5 decades playing devils, killers, and clowns spent his final year on record telling interviewers, readers, and a live audience exactly how he felt about dying. Calmly, honestly, and without a trace of the theatrical menace he was famous for on screen. He talked about wanting to earn the privilege of not being here. He wrote about fading gently from light into dark oblivion and finding comfort in that idea. He stood in a wheelchair in front of a crowd, celebrating the film that made him immortal, and told them plainly that he couldn't walk anymore, that it was limiting, and he said it without asking for pity. That's what makes it land the way it has. Not one dramatic deathbed sentence, but a full year of Tim Curry talking about the end of his life in the same unflinching way he approached every character he ever played. Direct, unafraid, and completely without pretense. When the call came in that Tuesday night in North Hollywood, and paramedics found him gone with no signs of struggle, no foul play, nothing violent, it matched almost exactly the ending he'd described to CBS 10 months earlier: peaceful, welcomed, and on his own terms. Fans online have spent the past 2 days sharing that CBS clip and quoting from Vagabond, and it's easy to see why. It's rare for anyone, let alone someone that famous, to describe their own death in advance and then have it happen almost exactly the way they said it would. Curry spent his career being the person audiences couldn't look away from. In the end, it turned out his most memorable performance wasn't scripted at all. It was just him, talking honestly about the one thing none of us get to rehearse.